May 23, 1944. A lonely transit camp near Cherbourg, France. The air stinks of diesel fumes, stale fear, and the recent terrifying chaos of the Normandy beachheads. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, a 20-year-old infantryman from the 7th and 16th Static Infantry Division, clutches a half-eaten piece of dry bread. His tunic is torn, his face grimy with the residue of battle, and his mind is a churning mix of exhaustion and dread. Just days ago, he was fighting fiercely for every hedgerow against the relentless advance of the Canadian forces. Now he stands in a massive mud-caked compound surrounded by thousands of fellow prisoners, the captured remnants of the Wehrmacht's disastrous defense of the Atlantic Wall. A brusque American sergeant barks orders, directing them into the open doors of a train. The prisoners, their boots dragging on the ballast, climb into the cramped, windowless boxcars. The doors clang shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. Richter slides onto the hard, splintered floor next to Corporal Hans Ziegler, a veteran radio operator captured in the desperate retreat from Caen. "They are taking us to England, yes," Ziegler whispers, his voice thick with apprehension. Richter shakes his head, the movement tight and wary. "No. Too many of us. The rumors say America, the long haul. I heard stories from the last war camps. Barbed wire, starvation, hard labor until the war ends. They will punish us." This fear is shared by every man in the car. German military propaganda had painted a vivid, brutal picture of Allied prison camps' tales of vengeful guards, starvation rations, and the cruel retribution for the destruction inflicted by the Reich. They expected the worst. The train journey across France is a blur of stops and starts, punctuated only by the rattling of the wheels and the low murmurs of their guards. Finally, days later, they are shuffled, blinking in the harsh sunlight, onto the docks of a major port, likely Glasgow or a Canadian terminal, though they cannot be sure. The next stage of the journey is by sea, a cramped, terrifying voyage aboard a stripped-down transport ship. For 8 days, Richter suffers the constant, nauseating roll of the Atlantic, convinced at any moment a U-boat, perhaps one commanded by a man he knows, will sink their vessel, sending them all to a freezing, watery grave. The irony is bitter. The guards keep their distance, efficient but silent. There is no violence, no overt brutality, but the silence itself is intimidating. The destination is utterly unknown. Finally, they arrive. The port is immense, cold and clean, far larger than anything in Europe. They are marched directly from the gangplank to another waiting train, this one an endless ribbon of carriages designed for long distance travel. The landscape they see as they move west is alien massive untouched forests, glittering blue lakes, and then vast empty plains stretching out to an impossibly huge horizon. This is not the cramped war, torn Europe they knew. After what feels like a lifetime, days turning into a week on the rails, the train grinds to a final, permanent stop. They are somewhere deep in the heart of this colossal unknown country. The Canadian Guards, dressed in their familiar khaki, stand waiting. Richter, squinting against the harsh continental sun, sees a large wooden sign hammered into a post. The lettering is simple, stark, POW Camp No. 132, Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. He braces for the shouted commands, the rough shoves, the inevitable confrontation with the wire. But what he sees instead is a sprawling complex that looks less like a fortress of vengeance and more like a tidy, if isolated, village. The perimeter is wire, yes, but the atmosphere is calm. Late May 1944, Camp 132, Medicine Hat, Alberta. The gates swing open, and the long column of German prisoners, led by Richter and Ziegler, marches onto Canadian soil proper. The first thing that hits Richter is the sheer cleanliness. The dirt pathways are swept. The wooden barracks are painted a stark white and green, and the Canadian Guards carry their Lee Enfield rifles with a casualness that suggests boredom, not aggression. There are no snarling dogs, no loud aggressive commands. The complex is vast. Camp 132, or simply Medicine Hat to the Men, was one of the largest prisoner of war facilities in Canada. Built to house thousands, it was located here, far from the coasts and major population centers, partly for security and partly to leverage the massive empty plains of Alberta. The prisoners are processed quickly. Instead of being stripped and searched aggressively, they are given a simple medical check and issued new, durable clothing marked with a large POW, prisoner of war stamp. During the intake process, Richter encounters an older German soldier, Feldwebel Emil Kress, who had been captured in North Africa years earlier and recently transferred. Kress had a strange, almost serene look in his eyes. "Kress, tell me the truth." Richter whispers urgently. "What is this place? Is this the staging ground before they send us to the coal mines?" Kress smiles a slow, tired expression. "They send you to work, yes, Richter, but not in a mine. Look around you. The guards here, they barely speak, but they treat us by the book, the Geneva Convention." This is the second shock. The guards strictly adhere to the international agreements governing the treatment of prisoners. German officers retain their rank and privileges, receiving officers' rations and avoiding mandatory labor. Enlisted men like Richter and Ziegler are required to work, but the conditions and pay are entirely unexpected. After being assigned their quarters, a surprisingly spacious, heated barrack shared with 20 other men, the prisoners settle in. The quality of life is immediately evident: 3 regular, if plain, meals a day, sufficient heat, clean bedding, and even a small library stocked with German books provided by the Canadian YMCA. This is not a prison. Ziegler mutters one evening, staring out the window at a group of their comrades playing football in the enclosed yard. This is a strange holiday camp. The Canadians, however, had a motive beyond simple humanitarianism. The massive demand for food production during the war meant that Canadian agriculture was severely short-handed. Millions of acres of wheat, sugar beets, and vegetable crops lay fallow or risked rotting in the field. The solution was obvious: use the captive workforce. The POWs at Camp 132 would become the temporary, invisible backbone of the prairie labor force. A few days later, a Canadian officer, Captain MacDonald, addresses the assembled enlisted prisoners. He explains the system. They will be offered work details on surrounding farms, particularly harvesting the immense sugar beet crops. "You will be paid," MacDonald states flatly, causing a ripple of confused murmurs among the prisoners. According to the scale set by the convention, 50 cents a day. You will not receive Canadian dollars, but scrip, special coupons redeemable only inside the camp's canteen for things like cigarettes, stationery, and extra luxuries. The prospect of working for real money, or something approaching it, is revolutionary. In Germany, they were used to constant shortages and austerity. Here they were being paid to work the land. The first assignment for Richter and Ziegler is a local farm miles outside the main camp perimeter, protected only by a token armed guard. The true nature of this secret prison is about to be revealed. June 1944, a sugar beet farm outside Medicine Hat, Alberta. The drive out to the fields is surreal. Richter, Ziegler, and a dozen other enlisted prisoners sit in the back of an open Canadian Army truck. The surrounding prairie is breathtakingly vast, golden in the early morning light. Their guard, a grizzled reservist named Sergeant McIntyre, sits casually in the passenger seat, his rifle resting across his lap, seeming more interested in the passing scenery than his high-value captives. When they arrive at the farm, they are met by the owner, a stout, weathered man named Mr. Henderson. He manages to communicate the nature of the labor. The back-breaking task of thinning and weeding the endless rows of sugar beets, mostly through energetic gestures and broken German phrases learned from local immigrants. The work is indeed grueling, conducted under the fierce Alberta sun, but the routine is instantly recognizable and familiar to the former soldiers, many of whom came from rural backgrounds. It is honest, productive work, far removed from the senseless violence of the trenches. What truly shocks the prisoners, however, is the treatment they receive from the civilians. During their midday break, Mrs. Henderson, a kind, faced woman with flour on her apron, emerges from the farmhouse. She doesn't bring the bare standard rations expected of prison labor. Instead, she brings thick sandwiches, jugs of cold water, and slices of warm, freshly baked pie. Richter hesitates, looking nervously at Sergeant McIntyre, who simply shrugs and starts eating his own lunch. "Zen's young, eat, boys," McIntyre says simply. "She's not giving it to you because she likes Nazis. She's giving it to you because you're working hard and she knows what good field labor needs." This humanization, this unexpected generosity from the enemy civilian population, dismantles years of propaganda in a single afternoon. These farmers, whose families had struggled to build lives on this harsh land, saw not ideological enemies, but simply young men capable of productive labor. They offered basic decency. In the ensuing weeks, this pattern solidified. The prisoners eager to earn their scrip for the camp canteen, where they could buy highly desired items like real pipe tobacco and chocolate, worked diligently. They were often left largely unsupervised, sometimes working alongside elderly or young members of the farmer's family. The proximity to freedom was immense. The perimeter of the work zone was imaginary, defined only by the honor of the Geneva Convention and the promise of fair treatment. Richter, realizing he could simply walk away into the endless prairie, found himself asking why he would want to. "We could be free. Hens," Richter whispers to Ziegler one hot afternoon as they weed the rows. Ziegler grunts, wiping sweat from his brow. "Free to walk 1,000 miles across a country we do not know, in stolen clothes, with no food, hunted by people who have fed us pie. And then what? We are paid here. We have a bed. We are not shot at. And the war is still going. This is better than the Western Front." The conditions were so humane, the work so productive, and the pay invaluable canteen scrip so motivating that the escape rate from Camp 132 and its satellite work sites was negligible. The Canadians had discovered a revolutionary principle, that treating your enemy with respect, governed by adherence to international law, created a disciplined, cooperative, and effective workforce. The shock on the faces of new arrivals, like Richter and Ziegler, was the same. This was not a punitive prison. It was a functioning, highly efficient labor center, where decency was the unwritten rule. Summer 1944, Camp 132 Canteen, Medicine Hat. The heart of Camp 132's internal economy is the canteen. It is here that the scrip, the special coupons earned by the enlisted men, changes hands for small but powerful luxuries. The air inside the canteen is thick with tobacco smoke and the low buzz of commerce. Klaus Richter approaches the counter, pulling a worn wad of scrip from his pocket. After weeks of backbreaking labor thinning beets, his hands are calloused, but his morale is surprisingly high. 2 packs of players and that tin of cocoa powder. Richter instructs the fellow prisoners serving behind the counter. The Canadian authorities allowed the prisoners to manage the canteen, further empowering them and instilling a sense of responsibility. The goods available, genuine, high-quality Canadian manufactured items, are intoxicating cigarettes, chocolate, shaving cream, stationery, and even German newspapers flown in from neutral countries. These small comforts represented a life of normalcy and dignity, something they hadn't experienced since before the war began. The work program was a massive success for Canada. By the end of 1944, thousands of German POWs in Alberta were performing critical labor, often surpassing the output of local civilian workers. Their presence alleviated a crippling labor shortage in agriculture, directly supporting the Allied war effort. But the moral question remained. What did this humane treatment do to the prisoners' loyalty? The internal dynamic of the camp was complex. The officers, who were forbidden from working under the Geneva Convention, often maintained a stricter line of discipline and unwavering loyalty to the Reich. They resented the enlisted men's willingness to work for the enemy and sometimes even imposed punishments or social exclusion on men who were deemed too cooperative. However, the experience of the enlisted men working outside the wire created a profound shift. Hans Ziegler summarizes the growing sentiment one evening while they share a smoke outside their barrack. When we left France, I thought the war would end with me starving behind wire. Ziegler says, inhaling deeply. Instead, I am paid more than I was in the Wehrmacht. I eat better, and I'm not freezing in a foxhole. He pauses, crushing the cigarette but carefully. The Canadians treat us with strict honesty. They follow the rules. They treat us like men who must work, not like animals to be punished. The propaganda at home told us the Allies were beasts. They lied to us about everything, Richter, about the war, about the enemy, even about the conditions of our surrender. This realization, that the enemy was adhering to an ethical standard that their own government had long discarded, caused a massive ideological rift. The prisoners were receiving firsthand experience of the democratic ideals they had been taught to despise. As the war turned decisively against Germany in 1945, the humane treatment provided by Canada became a life raft, not just physical, but psychological. For many, the simple act of being paid, of being treated with respect by the local farmers, and of surviving the war in relative comfort, fostered an emotional connection to this vast, peaceful land. The end of the war was rapidly approaching, and for the men of Camp 132, the prospect of returning to a shattered, occupied Germany was terrifying. They had seen the alternative. May 8, 1945, Camp 132, Medicine Hat, Alberta. The news hits Camp 132 with a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. Germany has formally surrendered. The war in Europe is over. The silence that follows the announcement is profound, a silence that marks not a victory, but the profound end of a life they knew. For Klaus Richter and Hans Ziegler, the immediate fear of combat is replaced by a paralyzing question. What now? Under international law, all German POWs were to be swiftly repatriated. However, Canada's need for agricultural labor had not disappeared. In fact, it was more urgent than ever as the global demand for food soared. For months following the surrender, the prisoners remained in Canada, still working the fields, albeit with the understanding that their time was limited. The Canadian government faced a unique challenge. They had thousands of disciplined, experienced, and highly effective workers. Many of these men, like Richter, had already spent a year adapting to the Canadian climate and way of life. More critically, thousands of the former POWs were openly expressing a desire not to return to Germany. "I have nothing left there," Ziegler tells Richter one evening, looking over the vast, untouched prairie that now felt like home. "My village is gone. My family is scattered. Here I have a skill. I have a place to sleep, and I was treated honorably. Why would I volunteer to return to ruin?" This sentiment was widespread. The kindness shown by the local farmers, the dignity of the scrip payment, and the sheer contrast between the peace of Alberta and the devastation of Europe had fundamentally changed their worldview. The Canadian government began a slow, measured process of repatriation. Most prisoners, particularly officers loyal to the old regime or those with strong family ties, were eventually shipped back. However, the path was carefully smoothed for thousands of others. The mechanism was complex but effective. Former POWs could not simply immigrate immediately after being released, but by placing them in displaced person status or through special programs designed to engage former POWs for temporary work. While they cleared legal hurdles, Canada created a loophole. Former prisoners were given opportunities to work in crucial labor-intensive sectors, effectively keeping them in the country legally until they could formally apply for immigration. The farmers who had grown dependent on the German labor force vouched for them, provided references, and often guaranteed their employment. Men like Klaus Richter and Hans Ziegler saw their chance. They embraced the transition from prisoner to temporary resident and eventually to immigrant. They settled across the prairies and beyond, becoming vital parts of the communities that had once held them captive. The story of Camp 132 and the other Canadian POW camps stands as a testament to the power of humane treatment, even toward those who fought against you. By strictly adhering to the Geneva Convention, by paying their enemy invaluable scrip, and by respecting their human dignity, Canada did more than just secure its vital food supply. It won over thousands of future citizens. The war ended. The walls came down, and those former soldiers, many of whom arrived expecting barbarity, chose to stay in the land that paid them real money for honest work, a profound legacy of decency, forged behind simple barbed wire in the heart of the Canadian West. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible, untold story of World War II, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next historical deep dive. Let us know in the comments what other forgotten stories from history you'd like us to explore.